Good morning, Pa. All right, let's continue on. There was one section, so we were working on the redemption of Eve, and Jonah Barnes mentioned the two different sides of, the problem with, devaluing women in society because of the story of Adam and Eve. And then there's one that's now the idea of women and men are just the exact same, and the radical feminism kind of stuff. And I have my own thoughts on that, and I don't know if I'll get to them, but or the trying to ordain women to the priesthood thing. That women have their own divine role. They don't need to take over in these spaces, and we lose that because we're losing out on this. That's the one that I'm talking about. I look forward to expounding on that later, because that's a interesting thing. All right, let's actually just read. The pushy serpent. On the brass plates and the book related to them, before the first even begins at the tree of knowledge, Eve enters the ring as a formidable opponent. Genesis would have us believe that our first mother is just Adam's arm candy. But many apocryphal works and the brass plates reveal that she was much, much more. Satan couldn't simply nudge her into transgression. He had to push her. When Lehi retells the serpent's conversation with Eve, he states, "Wherefore he, the devil, said, Partake of the forbidden fruit, and ye shall not die, but ye shall be as the gods, knowing good and evil." At first glance, this doesn't appear very dissimilar from the traditional Genesis. But in Genesis, the devil only asks an innocent question. Hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? It's almost like the serpent is interested in retaining plausible deniability. He was merely asking a question. At no point does he tell Eve to eat the fruit. This is not a small point. When describing the entrance of death into the world, it's not nitpicky to be precise on who had the idea. On the other hand, the Book of Mormon says it was the devil who came up with the idea, not Eve. Lehi retells the scene using the imperative form of the verb. Satan said, "Partake of the forbidden fruit." Keep in mind that ancient languages conjugate verbs differently depending on their tense. Lehi says Satan employed the command form of the verb to Eve, while the verb to eat or to partake doesn't change from infinitive to imperative. In English, it probably did in Adamic, or whatever language a snake speaks. Parseltongue, maybe? Lehi's serpent is linguistically commanding Eve to eat the fruit. This is much different than coyly planting the idea. Lehi would not lightly change the words of the Genesis account if he were drawing from them. Just a verse earlier, he states that his knowledge comes from the things which he has read. Would Lehi then deviate from the wording in Genesis immediately after? No, the brass plates show a pushier devil than the traditional canon. Which is right? In the Greek life of Adam and Eve, Satan's boldness matches Lehi's description. The imperative verbs used by Satan are here italicized for emphasis. I am grieved on your account, for I would not have you ignorant. But arise, come hither, hearken to me, and eat, and mind the value of that tree. And he saith to Eve, Come hither, and I will give it thee. Follow me. That is Greek Life 6:7-9. Sheesh. All right, already. No wonder Eve gave in. What a pest. Lehi's account agrees with apocryphal descriptions of an imposing, brash devil, rather than a cowardly, meddling trickster, like the traditional Genesis. When Satan reappears in the New Testament, he is on stage for 8 verses. Satan asks Jesus 3 meddling questions, similar to the Satan of Genesis, and Jesus spurns him. But when Satan says he'll give Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, Jesus does not rebut with, "You'll what? Those aren't yours to give." Instead of instead of suspecting that the Old Testament could be deficient or that Jesus and Satan might have a history, George Leo Haydock's take is typical of creedal Christians. Quote, "The father of lies here promises what is not his to give. What arrogance, what pride." Jesus didn't dismiss Satan so casually, telling Simon, "Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat." Jesus has to remind people to be cautious of the power of Satan. Creedalists then and creedalists today are lulled into a sense of security regarding Satan, which the brass plates, the Book of Mormon, and Jesus himself try fighting against. The Quran focuses the blame on Satan, even more clearly. Instead of just peppering Adam and Eve with irritating questions, Satan gave an oath to them, or wa quasamahuma ini. Muslim theologian Sayyid Muhammad Bakr al-Khwazini explains, it did not cross Adam's mind that Satan, while taking an oath in God, could be lying. It was the first time in history of creations that a being swears in God's name falsely. It comes from what is the Islamic view of original sin. The old Slavonic Book of Enoch also supports the idea that creation is a great test for mankind. In this retelling of Enoch's panoptic vision, the Lord explains creation thus, "And I called his name Adam, and showed him the two ways, the light and the darkness. And I told him, this is good, and that bad, that I should learn whether he has love towards me, or hatred, that it be clear which in his race love me." 2 Enoch 30, 13 through 14. Notice the parallels with Lehi's pronouncement, which was expressly inspired by the brass plates. "Wherefore men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given them which are expedient unto man, and they are free to choose liberty and eternal life, through the great mediator of all men, or to choose captivity and death, according to the captivity and power of the devil." It becomes harder and harder to believe that Eve just ignorantly stumbled into greatness. The pushier Satan gets, the stronger Eve appears. This is another reason why the brass plates account is far more pro-woman than traditional Genesis. Eve's reasoning. In the traditional Bible, Eve puts up no fight. She saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired to make one wise. With one innocent little question, Satan has Eve all tied up in knots. In contrast, the extra-canonical versions of the story are much more favorable to Eve. In the Armenian Adam and Eve and the Incarnation, Eve figures out the puzzle first. She then explains it to Adam. "And I said to Adam, do not fear, for when you will eat of it, you will have the ability to know good and evil." The Discourse on Abton inserts the fascinating detail that the unselfish Eve reassured Adam. "And Eve said unto Adam, Come thou and eat. If God shall blame thee, I will take everything upon myself before God." The Georgian Book of Adam offers even more detail. Eve tells the story of giving the fruit to Adam. "I told him, do you wish me to tell you something or not? Until today we were like dumb animals. Then I understood that which the Lord had said to us, Do not eat of this. And when I saw its splendor, I took of it and ate of it, and I knew good and evil. Now eat also of it, and you will become like God." Adam replied to me and told me, "I fear lest God be angry with me and tell me, My commandment which I gave you, you did not keep. You did not keep it." But I told the Father, "On me shall be this blame. If he asks you, say thus, This woman whom you have given me is to blame for that." She said, "See the favor of this glory." Georgia, wow. These are completely different people than the naive couple in Genesis. Eve isn't just hungry, she's wise. Adam isn't a fool either. He knows exactly what will happen if he eats the fruit. All the gullible pageantry is gone. Adam and Eve are accountable and ultimately decide to turn the lemons of their dilemma into the lemonade of wisdom. Eve knows perfectly well that she will be blamed, but she wants the knowledge of good and evil. She does the math. She successfully convinces Adam with logic, not tricks. The Georgian account says her persuasion worked too. After Adam was caught, he did as Eve asked. Then Adam remembered my words, which I had said. Do not be concerned for the blame, for it will lie upon me. And Adam said, Lord, it is as this woman whom you gave to me, who deceived me. For a long time, readers of Genesis chuckled to see that Adam wastes no time pointing the finger at Eve. They say, not only were our first parents fools, they were bickering fools. These extra-canonical accounts paint a totally different picture. Adam is no coward, and Eve is no fool. They take their fate into their hands and enter the mortal test through the hard doorway of the fall of their own accord. Eve's selfless sorrow. While Genesis shows no remorse on Eve's part, the apocryphal accounts are full of Eve's sorrow. Right after the expulsion, the Egyptian life of Adam and Eve shows Eve loyal to her husband and brave in accepting accountability. O God, forgive me my sin, the sin which I committed, and don't remember it against me, for I alone caused your servant to fall from the garden. Sorry, I'm pausing here because the staggering lack of accountability that is on display in the world is galling. There are and Eve sitting there and taking full accountability is something that just is a very big breath of fresh air. Eve's intercession on Adam's behalf worked, and God decided to raise them and comfort them. When Adam finally is on his deathbed, Eve still hasn't turned on him. In the Armenian penitence of our father Adam, she beseeches God on Adam's behalf. I have sinned, God. I have sinned against you, my beloved Lord. I have sinned against your elect angels. I have sinned against the cherubs. I have sinned against the seraphs. I have sinned before you. Lord, I beseech all you whom God created in the heavens and on the earth, that you intercede with the Father in heaven. It's Penitence 25:2. An archangel then appears to tell her, arise, Eve, from your penitence. God listens to Eve, very different from the chauvinism on display in Genesis, where the Lord blames the expulsion on Adam, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife. How would Tertullian have thought differently if Eve's selfless sorrow had been recorded in Genesis? Not only was Eve the first one to decipher the puzzle, she also felt terrible for the trouble it caused. This has got to be the most womanly thing in the world. My wife will slave over a meal and then apologize that it wasn't something else. Or she'll feel bad that our daughter scraped her knee, saying I should have told her to be more careful. Eve was the first mom. She did the right thing and avoided taking credit. She gave all of us life and still felt bad about our trials. She could be demanding praise, but instead she apologizes. Eve's vindication. According to the brass plates, Eve is divine, strong, wise, and selfless. But without Lehi's record, Eve has been misunderstood and maligned. The Nephite prophet Jacob, who was a custodian of the brass plates, anticipates the tendency to blame Eve and her husband. Quote, Now in this thing we do rejoice. We labor diligently to engraven these words upon plates, hoping that our beloved brethren and our children will receive them with thankful hearts, and look upon them, that they may learn with joy, and not with sorrow, neither with contempt, concerning our first parents. Jacob 4:3. Jacob thinks the fall is to be studied with joy, something Genesis can't give, but learning of the fall with joy was possible if the brass plates contained these more detailed accounts of Eve's foresight, logic, and selflessness. It's possible Jacob might have been implying a bit of history here. Jacob grew up with loud Deuteronomists in the family, Laman and Lemuel. More on Deuteronomists in chapter 10. Below, but Jacob's older brothers maintained that Jerusalem, that great city, would not be destroyed according to the word of the prophet. Laman and Lemuel were heirs to the school of thought that Eve screwed up. The mortality is dirty, and the law is the Messiah. When Jacob says to avoid looking upon Eve with contempt, he could be reliving angry dinner conversations with adamant Deuteronomists from his own household. Jacob is saying, don't be like your uncles. The Armenian penitence of our forefather Adam seems almost to predict and answer the chauvinistic critics of the future. Eve cries, all sins will be blamed upon me, and men will say, our mother did not hearken to the commandment of the Lord God. Along comes a wild beast which answers Eve, in truth, our insolence is because of you, for the example came from you. This talking animal sounds just like the Cretists. Eve is to blame for everything, even the wiles of animals. Growling tigers, Eve's fault. Barking dogs, Eve's fault. The popularity of Taylor Swift, blame it on Eve. But then what happens next? In steps Seth, Eve's righteous son, who rebukes the varmint. Close your mouth, O Satan. Get away from the image of God until the day will come on which God will bring you to rebuke. I like to imagine the beast was a little fluffy yippy dog, and Seth pronounced this mic drop, and then he kicked it through the uprights to score a field goal. Shadonk. Seth declares that it isn't just his father Adam who's created in the image of God, but his mother Eve too. He reminds the beast that God will come to rebuke Satan, and when he comes, he will be born of a woman. And as Jacob reads on the brass plates, it's clear that Seth doesn't appreciate contempt for his parents. Get the blame game out of here, because women are God's daughters, and a woman gave us Jesus. Murder and matrimony. Clearly, there's a lot more in Lehi's fall sermon than meets the eye. But that marvelous discourse isn't the first thing Lehi did when he read the brass plates. We read the accurate version of the fall story maybe for the first time. When he read the accurate version of the fall story, maybe for the first time, Lehi's heart immediately turned to family. He sent his sons back to Jerusalem. As will be discussed later in the chapter called The Inescapable Begats, Lehi had a good reason to view himself and his own family as heirs to the enslaved Josephite ancestors. Just like Joseph was exiled in Egypt, then his posterity was led out to a promised land, Lehi's ancestors had been exiled to Judah, and now he was being led out to a new promised land. The idea of replenishing this new land must have come directly from the brass plates creation narrative. Have you ever wondered how Nephi's parents reacted when he arrived back the first time? Nephi, you're back with the plates. Whew, we were worried something might go wrong. Nephi, covered in blood, Well, how fast can we pack? Returning to Jerusalem would have seemed like a bad idea for obvious reasons. For context, Lehi's sons had just escaped from Jerusalem, a serious journey. I had missed a footnote. A serious journey. Footnote was, though shrouded in poetic imagery, even Genesis preserves the prophecy that Eve's seed will someday have power to bruise Satan's head. Oh, okay, that's true. The serious journey he's talking about is Jerusalem is about 200 miles from Aqaba. Aqaba. Nephi seems to imply that it's a 3 days journey from Aqaba to the valley of Lemuel. He had skedaddled for good reason, too. In Jerusalem, a high-ranking military commander named Laban had just been brutally murdered during the feast celebrations. One of Laban's servants had been kidnapped at the same time. If he wasn't in league with the murderers, the most sacred history of the local community had been stolen, too. All this occurred right after Lehi's son had come knocking at Laban's door twice, asking for those very same plates. It wouldn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out that Lehi's boys were the culprits. So, fetching wives was a far more perilous quest than retrieving the plates right from the get-go. Lehi's boys are now guilty of real crimes, and the local constabulary is probably looking for them. If Lehi knew that Jerusalem, the holy city, would be destroyed, what should he have saved? What would we assume would be at the top of his priority list? Jeremiah? The Ark of the Covenant? The temple menorah? What about Moses' stone tablets? No. Lehi doesn't go back for any of that. His boys need wives. Whatever he read on the brass plates made Lehi determined to cultivate families. As he described in 1 Nephi 8:12, Lehi began to be desirous that my family should partake of the joyous fruit of the tree in his vision. The Book of Mormon puts marriage ahead of everything else, and seemingly in connection with the story of Adam and Eve. By contrast, the early Cretist fathers reading Genesis put wedlock below virginity. See Jerome's letter to Pamachius II. Oh, Pamachius, and that's, I guess, page 2. Jeez, wedlock below virginity. Yeesh. St. Jerome completely dismisses the command to be fruitful and multiply. We have read the first decree of God, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. But while we allow marriage, we prefer the virginity which springs from it. Jeez. Jerome also writes, nihil immundius menstruata, meaning nothing is so unclean as a menstruating woman. Really, Jerome? Nothing? Jerome clearly never had to clean the grease trap at a McDonald's. Jerome never washed the front fender of his car after driving through Minnesota in the spring. Jerome never used a public toilet in San Francisco. How is it Christian to condemn women for something they have no control over? Starting with Eve, women are maligned as inherently, naturally, inescapably, and hopelessly unclean. Leviticus hints at this in the law of Moses. Leviticus 15:19 says that menstruating women are ceremonially unclean, but then burying a dead body also makes someone defiled, but is in no way a sin. As a translator, Jerome should know that something can be unclean and still worthy. Christ had specific refutation for this notion when he detached ceremonial cleansing from spiritual purity. Jesus said, not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth defileth a man. As if to say, a man's choices can make him unclean, not simply what his circumstances are. This appears relevant to menstruating women. But note, Jerome is saying this in the 5th century A.D., hundreds of years after the law of Moses has been fulfilled. He's not sacrificing animals, but he won't let go of women are filthy rhetoric. Matrimony is always a vice, and all that can be done is to excuse it and sanctify it, said St. Jerome, as part of his wedding vows. No, just kidding. It wasn't part of his wedding vows, but he did say it. That's Theodore Schroeder, Obscene Literature and Constitutional Law, privately printed for forensic uses, New York, 1911, page 48, preserved at Cornell University Library. Again, just so you have that quote, matrimony is always a vice. All that can be done is to excuse it and sanctify it. Jeez. Wrap your head around that statement for a second. Jerome sounds disappointed that God sanctified marriage. If only God would get out of the way, we could stop all this marriage nonsense. Jerome apparently thinks God only allows marriage begrudgingly, or as the Council of Trent put it, a remedium amoris, a cure for love. The mania around celibacy was so real that Origen, the most brilliant theologian of the 3rd century, literally castrated himself. And he did this without American public school teachers and doctors pressuring him to do it. In the creedist's mind, marriage is awful, but we have to deal with it. There wasn't even a carve out for the creation of children. Marriage was viewed as ugly specifically because it led to children. Origen wrote, matrimony is impure and unholy, a means to sensual passion. This is not adultery or fornication. This is sex within a lawfully wedded couple, yet it is still seen as unholy. Women, marriage, and procreation are marked as unclean by the creedists. Do the creeds attract guys who are just recently dumped or something? They sound like a flock of embittered divorcees on Reddit, each typing with a cigarette in his fingers next to the 3 empty ice cream cartons. Didn't this dude have a mother? He needed a good chancla. Oh, chancla. I've never read chancla in words before. I've heard he needed a good chancla upside the head after writing this. Chancla is the sandal, the Mexican sandal. He needed a good Mexican mount. Anyway, these are not the eager sons of Lehi who complained about hunting down the plates, but had zero complaints about finding wives. The same apocryphal versions of Genesis story that taught Lehi about the fortunate fall also have a positive view of marriage. In the book of the Bee, it's only through Eve that Adam truly appreciates his creator. Because Adam had not seen his own formation and was not acquainted with the power of his maker, it was necessary that when Eve was taken from him in his own likeness, he should perceive his maker. B, chapter 13, last line. The Quran also thinks marriage is ordained of God. In Surah Ar-Rum, the Muslim prophet cites several ayatihi, or proofs of God's greatness. And one of his ayatihi is that he created for you spouses from among yourselves so that you may find comfort in them. In fact, when the Quran says marriage is a great covenant, it uses the words Nithak Galitha, which are the very same words used to represent the great covenant between Muhammad and Allah, which is as divine as a relationship can get. For the Quran, there's nothing so sacred and holy as the Nithak Galitha. Marriage is held in the highest esteem. The Quranic view is not just a platonic contract either. The Quran praises Allah who made his mate of life nature, in order that he might dwell with her in love. It should be noted that Islam completely rejects the notion of original sin. I'm astounded at, I understood cognitively the whole, they prefer celibacy like in the Catholic Church or in these old traditions and things like that. I get that. That I kind of understood. And I knew that there was preferences to celibacy over marriage because of certain passages from the New Testament. But that was a gut punch to really just see how just bitter and venomous they were against marriage and children. It just doesn't make logical sense to me. Makes no logical sense. I guess I'm saying that on an emotional level, because if you go through pure logic without reason, pure logic without emotional guidance, and pure logic without reason, then you can easily tie yourself up in knots about sexual desires being abhorrent, and therefore that also means living a chaste life with your wife could still, like, you just have to ignore so many other things, but you could do that. Like, you can mentally twist yourselves in knots to get there. Jeez. So, I did miss one of the footnotes that would have been really funny, talking about the eager sons of Lehi who complained about hunting down the plates, but had zero complaints about finding wives. His footnote on that is, Laman and Lemuel and Sam complained about returning for the plates. And now, behold, thy brothers murmur, saying it's a hard thing which I have required of them. And then in 1 Nephi 7 records, not so much murmuring about the wife quest. It could be that they learned. It could be that everyone loves to do the description that they're like, oh, we need to go get wives? Yeah, we'll do that. At the same time, it could be, I wonder if they had Ishmael's family already in mind, that they were already interested in them and had the plans to join together in that way. And so they also thought of it as much more doable. Because here's Laban, who is probably a military commander, and if a military commander, that also means that he's religiously important. So not only is he in his military regalia, probably during the Passover feasts, but he's also kind of this high priest figure to have the plates of brass anyway. Yeah, and go get something that is a sacred relic for the community out of his hands. Versus, that family that we already really like and you want to marry their daughters, how about you go get them? It seems like a lot more easy and doable task too. So it's not just them going, woohoo, wives. I think for them, the barriers to getting them to come along is not as hard. The first romance. The book of... The book of the Cave of Treasures describes how Adam rejoiced in her greatly upon seeing Eve for the first time. A touching moment from the history of the creation of the transgression of Adam and Eve, a recently discovered Armenian text, shows an emotional tie between the first husband and wife. Adam is contemplating whether to keep the commandments and watch Eve, exiled, or eat the fruit and go with her. It reads, Adam examined the fruit in his hand for 3 hours and said, I cannot live without this woman. The transgression records Adam finally deciding, for it is better for me to die than to become separate and detached from this woman. Note from the author, my wife loves that story. Eve apparently adores her husband right back. The Armenian, concerning the creation of Adam and the incarnation of Christ, our God. Wow, that is a long title. Concerning the creation of Adam and the incarnation of Christ, our God, says that the prospect of being separated from her husband, Eve cried and begged him, saying, "Let us die together or live together. Do not separate me from you." The Egyptian life of Adam and Eve tells how Adam can barely stand having Eve out of his sight, even for a moment. When Adam and Eve enter a dark cave, Adam cries, "O Lord, as long as we were in the garden, we neither saw nor even knew what darkness was. I was not hidden from Eve, neither was she hidden from me until now, that she cannot see me. And no darkness came over us to separate us from each other, but she and I were both in one bright light. I saw her, and she saw me. I do not see her, and she does not see me. O Lord, will you then plague us with this darkness?" It should be noted that while Adam is saying this, Eve is not gone. She's present with him, just not visible. Adam is simply so accustomed to her face that being deprived of it is a plague. A reminder of the literature says that the remainder of the literature lays the story out unmistakably. Adam and Eve are nearly always together, which isn't obvious considering Adam's initial blaming of Eve for tempting him with the fruit. Several stories repeated throughout the apocryphal texts explain that the real trouble arises whenever they are separated. Satan always begins by trying to catch them alone, which is a wise observation. Too many people nowadays. The Armenian penitence of our forefather Adam says, Adam realized this. At the time Satan deceived your mother and caused her to eat of the fruit, Satan knew that I was not with her, nor the angels at that time he caused her to eat. Nor angels at that time he caused her to eat. Since the very first temptation, Satan preys upon married people when they are separated from their spouses. In the Egyptian life of Adam and Eve, God and his angels plan a somewhat romantic setting for Adam's proposal to Eve. God sends angels with gifts to Adam who tell him to give it to Eve as a wedding present gift. Adam obeyed the angels and took the gold and put it onto Eve's bosom in her garment and promised to marry her with his hand. This is in lovely contrast to Adam and Eve's bloodless partnership in the King James Genesis. What better models for Lehi and his family? Like Adam and Eve, the Lehites are thrust out of a comfortable and convenient life. Like a Garden of Eden, Lehi's land of inheritance was abundant with gold and silver and precious things. Laman and Lemuel were sad to leave precisely because they were losing the paradise of their prospects in exchange for the lone and dreary world. Adam and Eve, likewise, were exiled to the wilderness, with nothing but each other. Make no mistake, after being expelled from his comfy paradise, Lehi immediately reads about his forefather Adam and thinks, "This guy gets me." Naturally, Lehi immediately sends his sons back for wives, because he reads about the beautiful union of our first parents on the brass plates. Abominable babies. Yeah, I think I can get through this. Great. Once the brass plates have inoculated readers against the contempt for Eve and exalted matrimony, the logical next step presents itself just like Valentine's Day in February leads to baby blessings in November. The Josephite record has a lasting influence. First, it saved Eve. Then it saved marriage. Next came a baby in a baby carriage. In the traditional Bible, God simply commands Adam and Eve to multiply and replenish the earth. And subsequently, their children are nothing but trouble. And if you think your kids are naughty, imagine one of them straight up murdering the other. Here's the drab account of Eve's first birth from the traditional Genesis. And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. It's like reading stage directions from play synopsis. Eve has baby. Baby gets wrapped. Book 2, stage right. Exeunt, stage right. Unsurprisingly, St. Augustine of Hippo, another of Christianity's greatest theologians, would later cook up the notion that the guilt of the first sin is transmitted through sexual intercourse to all generations. Okay. I'm seeing the conclusion. I'm sure he had a thread of logic to get there, but I'm very grateful that I have the paradigm that I do. And when I'm introduced into someone else's paradigm, I hope I can be a lot more magnanimous. This is what the wise men of the West concluded from reading the Bible's account of the creation and the fall. The only connection between the fall and children drawn by the editors of Genesis is in the form of a curse. I will greatly multiply thy sorrows and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. Adam gets the curse of working by the sweat of his brow, and Eve gets kids. This straight line drawn by Genesis' account between children and sorrow quickly metastasizes into the abomination of infant baptism. The Cretists made sure to baptize children as soon as possible. Like Origen said, every soul that is born into flesh is soiled by the filth of wickedness and sin. In the church, baptism is given even to infants. If there were nothing in infants which required the remission of sins, and nothing in them pertinent to forgiveness, the grace of baptism would seem superfluous. We have to get those filthy, wicked babies baptized right away. And to follow his logic, of course, they are filthy because if they weren't filthy, we wouldn't baptize them. Besides, they come from women. We all know how awful women are. The Cretists wrapped their souls into disdaining women and families. I'm trying to exercise my eyes by not using my glasses all the time. The Cretists warped their souls into disdaining women and families. The Creedal Council of Milium II from 416 AD grounds its reasoning by citing Paul's take on the fall. Quote, whoever says that infants fresh from their mother's wombs ought not to be baptized, let him be anathema, since what the Apostle Paul says, through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so passed to all men, in whom all have sinned. Romans 5:12. By screwing up Genesis, the canonizers made families look filthy. The brass plates tell a different story. Without the fall, Lehi explains that Adam would have remained in the Garden of Eden, and they would have had no children, wherefore they would have had remained in the state of innocence, having no joy. He's saying the fall was necessary for replenishing the earth, which isn't intuitive from the Genesis story. Lehi declares that the fall was a prerequisite for procreation, with no explanation, almost like it was obvious. So was the fall needed to have children? Or is Joseph making something up again? It turns out that here, once again, the Book of Mormon agrees with apocryphal books. The Syriac Tales of the Prophets use the symbolism that reproductive organs only appeared after the fruit was eaten. Then they both ate of that tree, and so their private parts appeared to them. Whoa. One theory is that Adam and Eve were simply ignorant of the mechanics of intercourse. The Egyptian life of Adam and Eve says the angels had to tell Adam and Eve how to procreate, since they were theretofore completely unaware. If you thought the talk was awkward with your parents or 6th grade health class, imagine a group of angels explaining it to you. The progeneration of Adam and Eve is described as an act pure and undefiled, so that he would have children who would multiply and replenish the face of the earth. Thus was Satan's war with Adam defeated. An act pure and undefiled. Every husband has dreamed of defeating Satan's war with his sweet, sweet lovemaking. That's a good way to put it. You're just so good, dude. The Egyptian author sounds like he's repudiating the very critics who want to baptize babies. It's almost as if the writer is thumbing his nose at the anti-family crowd. How's the author of the Egyptian Life of Adam and Eve so approving of sex? Where did this author come from, reading such a radical declaration that our first parents' copulation was pure and undefiled? One has to ask, which tradition did the Egyptian author pull this perspective from? Scholars have tried their best to date the Egyptian text. But where and when in all of Christendom has there been such a bold exaltation of the procreative act, or in Judaism for that matter? This kind of attitude doesn't fit anywhere in the scholar-accepted ancient world. An unapologetic praise for women, families, and sex appears to come from a tradition outside the canon. The Armenian penitence of our forefather Adam actually tells us that the angel Gabriel came down at the command of God to get Adam and Eve to procreate. Gabriel came down and comforted them and told them to eat from the fruit of the earth, which was near to them. And he told them to draw near in marriage in imitation of the animals, and to multiply by childbirth according to the command of God. Replenishment was always part of the plan. Not only do the brass plates teach that the fall leads to children, they also tell us that children lead to joy. This is what Eve was after. Outside canon, works like the Armenian history of the transgression of Adam and Eve say that our first parents understood the benefits of their fall. And when Adam and his wife saw the light of this world, Adam and his wife rejoiced and were glad. And they said, even though it is not so good, and the light and fruits of this world are not equal to the light and fruit of the garden, nevertheless, with this we shall neither die nor remain in darkness. Then they were cheerful. In the Coptic apocryphal text, the mysteries of John the Apostle and Holy Virgin, the reason for the fall is simple. God took the righteousness wherewith Adam was arrayed, and he cast him forth from paradise, so that he said he would be fulfilled, and he could send his son to earth. So that was, good heavens, I butchered that. God took the righteousness wherewith Adam was arrayed, and he cast him forth from paradise, so that what he said would be fulfilled, and he could send his son to earth. The word his here refers to God. God wanted to send his son to earth, as if this had maybe been the plan all along. In a touching scene, the Egyptian life of Adam and Eve tells how Adam takes Eve to a special cave for her first birth. Adam felt sorry, and he was very worried about her. Any father who witnessed his wife give birth can relate to that. Yeah. And I also worry about the children at the time of birth, too. Adam is so distraught that he cries out, "O Lord, look at me with the eye of your mercy, and bring her out of her distress." When the Lord delivers Eve, Adam rejoiced at Eve's deliverance, and also over the children she had borne him. God didn't say, "You got yourself into this." He helped bring forth the joy of families to the earth. The Nephite prophet Jacob scolds his men for breaking the heart of your... the Nephite prophet Jacob scolds his men for breaking the heart of your tender wives and losing the confidence of your children because of your bad examples before them, and the sobbing of their hearts ascend up to God against you. In the Nephite view, God was pretty protective of families, in this case specifically wives and children. In the Mandaean text, Ginza Raha, when the Lord exiles our first parents, he offers encouragement. Adam, this is the place where you are going to live. Your wife Eve will come and join you here, and here your progeny will thrive. No sooner is the fall finished than God becomes eager to move on to the meat of his plan. The Lord says that creation was always about the whole human family. Come now, we will create Adam and Eve and make them the head of the whole generation. This seems an awkwardly positive statement in an otherwise gloomy situation. Adam and Eve have just been cast out, and the Lord comforts Adam by saying, Eve will join you, and your progeny will thrive. Marriage and family. The Lord sounds almost eager to get on with it. Unlike the many scholars and scribes that came later who somehow gleaned celibacy from the scriptures, Jehovah is pleased at Adam and Eve's familial prospects in the exciting new world beyond the garden. The Armenian history of the creation and transgression of Adam and Eve ends with one short and poignant verse. Thus they were cheerful. In Lehi and Nephi's tree of life vision, consuming the fruit is an immediate cause for joy. And as I partook of the fruit thereof, it filled my soul with exceedingly great joy. Wherefore I began to be desirous that my family should partake of it also. For I knew that it was desirable above all other fruit. The parallels are too tight to ignore. As wise parent, Lehi is a type of Eve. He partakes of the fruit and then immediately thinks of his children. The fruit leads to joy, just like Eve's fateful choice. The upshot. Lehi's conclusions from the brass plates find support in recently discovered apocryphal texts. Eve has been wrongly maligned for centuries because of the corrupted or truncated accounts of the Garden of Eden contained of Genesis. Our ignorance has led to marriage and babies being thrown out with the bathwater. A proper retelling of the fall shows that we should be thanking Eve for setting God's plan in motion. Lehi's adage, Adam fell that men might be, men are that they might have joy, is the most revolutionary verse in the Book of Mormon, and this sentiment is now supported by a host of additional witnesses. 24 centuries after Lehi delivered his pithy summary of the plan of salvation, the Restoration would build a church free from the Eve-hating misogyny of creedalism. The brass plates doctrine of the fortunate fall is the pure bottle into which the new wine of the gospel could be poured. That new wine includes the creative role of women, the divine institution of marriage, and eternal plan for families. All thanks to the brass plates. Scan for bonus content. Here you go. And that is the end of chapter 3. Okay, I have lots of thoughts. I am, first of all, astonished. Cognitively I knew that there was those kind of thoughts and cultures that went through creedless Christianity at different times. And I was mainly thinking of Catholic Church kind of stuff. I understand the desire for purity in one's thoughts. But to have it be, as he says, so twisted that when you read their own words about what they said, you're just like, yeesh. It is starkly contrasted. I mean, it's like, look, if someone is following the ideas of celibacy and they're like, I get it. The majority of people in this world, celibacy isn't their thing because those are natural needs, those are natural desires, and it's perfectly fine, and the human race has to still go on. And, those who are at least understanding and soft on the idea of, it is still good and it's still important, but they just value celibacy over marriage. That seems to be at least a reasonable position if you are someone who supports celibacy. But geez Louise, yeah, that's just viscerally, gut-punchingly, like, demeaning of women, family, children. But yet the logical conclusion of that is, if you have that point of view, if really it is that women and family and children are bad, what are you left with? You will be left with nothing. If you could enact your will, if you think that is the holy and right way to go, you have nothing after that. It's just, and especially with expressions so viscerally just like, it's slaps me in my face and goes, yeah, you understood it, but you didn't really know. That's one thing. It makes me very appreciative of being in a world, like, we're in a weird time, because at the same point, I'm sitting here thinking that here you have people who are just have morals of an alley cat wandering around. Women who are bragging about how many men they can consume in one day. Just like, this is ridiculous. It is. We're living in a world where there is two extremes, and especially we've gone to the other extreme. If during the Middle Ages and earlier times, the Puritan and puritanical views of, sex and family and etc. is bad, but, it's kind of a, we'll just kind of have to keep going, or, begrudging, and kind of just really being very puritanical. And now we've swung way the other way, where all the reasons for marriage and societal norms are being rediscovered because we're suffering from a generation or two, 10, 20 years of the repercussions of just unleashing everything. And now it's like, okay, we've got, like when I paused, when Eve was taking accountability, like 100%. I stopped because, I was like, wow, that is a breath of fresh air. Because so many of these things that are on display of stupid people on the internet is just these women that have no conception or desire to take any accountability whatsoever. That how often do you have someone take 100%, I'm accountable and I'm sorry, instead of trying to weasel out of it and say, well, my sister did it, or what does it matter, or it's his fault, or, things like that, where it's like, yeah, there's two sides to it. Men should take their side of accountability. They should. Like take just one simple, what should be simple, view, right? Modesty. Dressing modestly. This is something that should be simple, but now it's extremely controversial. The idea of imposing any kind of standard for modesty is just right out oppressive in most circles. In a religious context, it is something that still applies. And so, all right, modesty. Well, the woman shouldn't have to worry about what they wear because the men should just keep their minds out of the gutter and they shouldn't be filthy and they just shouldn't rape women. You hear that constantly, just you rarely hear, except now it's finally starting to come back, that women, like from a few creators, and heaven for, like if it comes from a man, it's pretty funny because they will do it to, and specifically say it bluntly, so it gets the gall of the women around them. And it still shows that that's still there. The gall and bitterness. I can't believe you said that. What, do you want me to cover from head to toe? Again and again and again. But the few creators who are women that say that, they also get that gall and reaction. But at least it's refreshing coming from a woman going, hey, no, maybe women should cover up at least minorly so that, they are not having plunging necklines and receding skirt lines and then showing off their midriff and then suddenly sit there and think, oh yeah, no, I can't believe they were staring at me. Men are such pigs. No, they're basically women calling out the other women saying, no, you're dressing like that to get attention of that sort. And then you turn around and shame them for giving you the attention that is exactly what you're seeking when you were doing exactly that. You should take responsibility for how you dress and the reactions that you get from that. Because it's like, oh, you're just victim blaming me. Yeah. When you see these discussions online, you're just like, when you unplug from the programming, the social programming, and you go, what does it mean to be accountable? Yeah. The men can sit there and avert their eyes from women. The men can sit there and clean their mind. They may have, wow, that girl looks hot, pop into their head, and then they can go, yeah, let that go. Let the breeze go through my mind again, and they're not even there anymore. Like some guy who just sees some girl walking down the street and who goes, whoo, there, and then turn away and just go on with their life. That brief 1 second image in their mind, they will never remember that girl later on. They won't. It's only if they sit there and go, ooh, and then they sit there and ruminate on it, will they get that in there. So can men control their thoughts? Yeah. Can men just not rape women? Well, yeah, they normally don't. Like the ones who do are the bad guys. And then but on the other token, it was so gloriously refreshing. It was strange to just sit there and see that passage where Eve goes, yeah, I'm the one who partook of the fruit and I'm sorry. You're just like, oh, she's not harping on anyone. She's taking 100% accountability. She is sorrowful for the actions that have caused problems. And it's not exactly there's the one that Jonah Barnes was pointing out, that it's like, my wife could make a meal and then apologize because it wasn't something else. It's like, are you kidding me? It's not this. There's a kind of, I don't know if it's a false piety. There are some women who have it as a false piety. There are others that this just generally always apologizing attitude that some women have, and it's just like, no, stop it. That's not useful. There's a difference between that and genuine accountability. Genuine accountability is truly refreshing. I think it's refreshing for anyone to take true accountability. The other thing I have to say, the other thing that is really interesting is he very briefly mentioned it, is the whole push for women should be in the priesthood. Well, why not? And here's the funny thing is I have neighbors and other things that they consider this. And in my gut, it's like, why are you even considering this? But if it's not explored and it's not articulable, then it's not a good reason to be dismissive. So if my gut reaction is, why is this even something that's considered? Because the idea is, well, what if women progress in all these ways? What was the idea? What was the argument? Why couldn't women hold the priesthood and do things like pass the sacrament, or officially like pass the sacrament, because they're now able to be witnesses for baptisms and things like that? Why couldn't they do more things like literally pass the sacrament and hold different positions? And it was interesting because, again, my gut reaction was getting in the way of articulation. And there was two things that I was able to specifically think of. The first is that we're not sitting here going, women should sit down and shut up and not speak to anybody in the pews. They shouldn't teach anybody. And in fact, nearly from the very beginning, the church has been extremely forward and extremely giving to women the organization of everything. I mean, the entire half of the church is run by women. The whole Relief Society and primary and all that, like nearly half of the entire church is run by women. Their own organizations, their own structures, the young women, the primary, all of that run by women. It's not men the overseeing of that is that ultimately the 12 apostles are all men, but they're their own designation. Like, the only things that they're specifically different is apostleships and like bishops and stake presidents, etc. Now, the women of Word Radio mentioned, why would we even want that? We already can do young women, primary, Relief Society. We already run half the church, and frankly, what's the point in being the bishop and sitting up there and stuff like that? I'd rather sit down with my family and be with them. In fact, they noted that how many times that when bishops are finally released, they're like, I'm grateful I can finally sit with my family again. It's like, you want to rip your mother, where you're comfortable with taking care of your children, away from them? It's like, so they were questioning a woman that was really pushing that, women should have the priesthood and they should be able to sit up there. And her complaint, her push, was that women aren't as recognized because they're not up there on the stand and getting recognition like the bishop does or the stake president does. So that means that what she was really wanting was the recognition. But the question is do they really want the responsibility? Because think of it. The bishops rely heavily on the Relief Society, just as much as they rely on the elders' quorum. We all work together. The only difference is just the head leadership position. And that means a lot of meetings. It's not just sitting up on the stand and getting recognized, because that's really what the woman was pushing about, was the recognition. And it's like, she just needed to feel seen. Well, because of the Book of Mormon and apocryphal texts, if women could be liturgically and scripturally seen more, then you wouldn't have as much of this jealousy kind of thing, because we already have that culture of honor, but apparently it doesn't sink down far enough, and it's not seen and understood enough, and in some ways it goes with the idea that if for every 1 unit of bad feeling is given to a man and a woman, a man will feel it as 1 unit of badness, but a woman will feel that 1 unit of badness as 2 units of badness. There is something in women that make it so that they feel twice as much pain to 1 unit of badness compared to men. And so I don't know if it's that or other things. It's just like, what is refreshing when you finally see it in the nature of women, when they are not harping on people, when they are not and it's the same for men too. I mean, but you don't sit there, you have these drill sergeant guys that are micromanagers. Nobody likes them either. Nobody. It's the same either side. But what's really refreshing is when you have someone, just like men and in women, if you have someone who is competent and confident and reasonable and understanding. All that is refreshing. What's refreshing in a woman? Someone who is competent, a woman who is wise, someone who is confident. She knows what she's talking about, and she's able to communicate that. And she believes in others. She's supportive, and and part of the competency is she's accountable, fully accountable, fully cognitive, fully aware of what's going on around her, not just emotionally, not just being like I'm put upon and other things like that, but just aware. The conscientiousness of it is when women and men are conscientious of what's actually around them, they are competent in what they're doing. It is a breath of fresh air. Oof. And so that's why it was so staggering and like, healing to have that one section where Eve was like, I understand, and I'm accountable, and I'm sorry. Because to me, it wasn't putting her down. Not at all. To me, it was refreshing that she was not trying to blame someone else or say she's a victim or other things like that. She said, I was fully aware. I did this, and I am sorry. I know it causes you pain. It's staggering. And so the main thing that I wanted to get to is my conception about, well, what would be the problem with women taking over these roles? Because them acknowledging the idea that the woman that they were specifically showing that what she wanted to be is acknowledged, and that's why she wanted the positions of being like a bishop and stake president, etc., was so important to her, was for that acknowledgement. She feels that it's, that the bishop has some sort of special privilege by being up there and being recognized. Getting that recognition and honor was a big thing for her. But the reality of it is they're separated from their families. They have a crap ton of meetings that they have to go to. They're removed from a regular schedule. They're constantly out there for other people. They don't have as much time to themselves. It is a sacrifice of a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of, and they're always on trial by everyone in the ward because of, if they say one wrong word and offend someone, that could ruin them from being in the church, kind of stuff. It is not a nice and easy position, and it has a lot to do with, why would you want all these priesthood responsibility? A lot of it means that you'll end up putting up a lot of chairs, things like that. But the fact is that women serve in basically the exact same capacity through the Relief Society, and always had. And so not only is it ignoring the history of the church, and it ignores the central role that women have always played, and the exulting and putting on a pedestal women for so many generations, to the point that I think it's weakened them, to the point that I don't think that women want to have that accountability that Eve showed. The grasping of the idea of I should be aware and I should be accountable and I should be serviceable just has escaped generations of women. That they have learned that it's better to be called a victim and to blame others and just have it be someone else's problem. It was his fault. Kind of crap. And it's just silly. Because when you find a guy who does the same thing, you call him a weasel. If a guy were to do the same things, if he was sit there and going, but I was, my circumstances, and you'd sit there and call him a weak weasel. And so it's not admirable in either gender. But we put women on such a pedestal because we recognize that they feel twice as much pain for one unit of badness. And I think it's done them a disservice. I think having an example of an upright, stalwart, wise Eve sitting there going, I figured the puzzle out. And I want us to do this. And this is a good thing, is a good thing to exemplify. And not only that, you exemplify with women who have been wise and the women who have helped them through. This is why the Nephite mothers, it's like, for the stripling warriors, are held in high regard. You know, they're willing to go out and risk their lives because their mothers knew it. They taught them in the righteousness. This is why women need to be a central big pillar of intelligence and wisdom in their families, so they can pass on the education. But most importantly, the other thing is that still sidesteps one thing. Even though in the past that they haven't, and even though in the past we've basically been equally yoked, with only the exception of, just the priesthood authority, line of authority, being in these prominent positions, even if that's not technically wanted because it's all this stuff, well, why not? Why not let them take that place? Why not? That is an entirely different question, because it surpasses all the other arguments that I've seen and had so far, which is, what if it changed? What if it was like in April, they came out and said, yeah, no, women can be bishops now, and they can be stake presidents and all this, and well, why not? Why not allow that position? The one actual defense of having that still remain, because if the logic is that if we've really been basically equally yoked, then why not allow that? Is we're actually already seeing the consequences of that same exact type of thinking in society. We're already seeing the results of that women should take over in every regard, that men need not apply. They are not wanted. You've done your job. Let the women take the reins now. We have seen it. We've already seen it. We've seen it in secular institutions. We've seen it in religious institutions. We see that men walk away. We're done. Well, it's just because they're misogynistic. They just can't stand the fact that a woman's in there. No, it's because they've been told they weren't wanted. They listen. They listen. We've been fed a stream for the past 20 years of women just going like I did before, about how men are bad and terrible, etc. And they've been listening. Dating is through the floor in this generation. Dating is gone. It's like hookup culture or bust in many cases, where there's just nothing worth it in there. What's the worth of it? I'm not appreciated here. I'm not wanted. I've heard it loud and clear. Every action says we're not wanted. Okay. And then walk away. That's one thing. The other thing is that that's kind of one of the main purposes of men, is they want to serve. They want to be able to give to others and be appreciated. If they don't get that in what they're doing, they will find it elsewhere. Where do they get it the easiest? Video games. In a video game, they can go and be a hero where they're appreciated for a very cheap cost of $100, $60 for the game, $100, a couple $100 for the system, $60 for the game, and then hours of their time. They can go be a hero. They can finally get someone saying thank you for helping us out. Instead of, why weren't you here sooner? And gosh, you're such a moron. Or, you just don't hold the door for me. I can do it myself. instead of hearing this constant stream of vitriol geared towards them, they can be thanked and appreciated. And the same thing with all the terrible vices of the electronic world. It's easy pleasure, it's easy lust, easy gratitude, easy appreciation. Instead of wearing the weight of the world on their shoulders and being kicked in the shins for it, they can just sit their world down, go into their man cave, enjoy their movies, their games, their TV, and spend time with other guys who enjoy their presence. Go golfing and be with their buddies. They'll find where they're going to be appreciated. And where they are appreciated, they will serve. They will serve. If they find it valuable and worthwhile, they will serve. The other thing that we see with that is that when, in the opposite, if women are the bestest ever, then we have seen the movement of men foregoing their identity as men to become women and invade women's spaces. It screws everything up. If the idea of that men and women are completely interchangeable, okay, fine. People will vote with their feet and their actions. That's exactly how it goes. If they can see that, well, women are actually privileged, suddenly all their identities become women because they're privileged. It's easier to get in school if you say you're this or this, list off these minorities. I'm not really white. I am from here, or here. People like Elizabeth Warren. She was so white, but she called herself Cherokee or whatever it was. It's like, she knew, she voted with her feet. She wanted the privilege of being a minority because there was privileges to be had, and she capitalized on it bigly. And so we are already reaping the result of this type of thought of just, okay, let's switch genders interchangeably. There's no problem. Men have no special place, women have no special place. Well, where do you have benefits? People vote with their feet and their actions. And you can see how they view the world through their actions. What do they value? I'm a man that values the traditions because I recognize their value. I value the role of men and women in their respective roles. I value women for their ability to be wise and nurturing and smart and capable and being able to just really keep things together and keep things well organized and, good heavens, reaching out and helping people. I am so focused on my tasks and getting things done and driving to accomplish things that, am I really good at learning everyone's names and asking how their kids are doing and catching up with so-and-so? No, I'm terrible at it. If I am the pile driver to get things done, if I'm the nail to drive through, the drill bit to get through the wall and everything like that, if I'm the drill bit, my wife is the spread out networking tool. She's the one that will reach out and keep up this network of people. And it's entirely different. She has skills that I just do not possess because I haven't had to use them, thankfully because of my wife, and because I haven't developed them. And we're so much better at working together in that way. I'm sure if I did not have a wife, then I'd have to learn to be more of a networker, but it would pale in comparison. She has a natural ability at that. And So mostly to the point, the idea is that if the push to have women in men's spaces is that of covetousness, Plain and simple, it is covetousness, and we see it in both directions. Women wanting to be in men's spaces and have the men's things is covetousness. They think, well, the men have something better, and it's not right, and so they leverage emotion and victimhood, and they just leverage everything to manipulate it so that they want to be and have and join in those men's spaces. Okay, and when they do that, and the men are crowded out because they're not wanted there anymore, they walk away. They go make their other group. But then why aren't, that invasion keeps happening. And it keeps just destroying men's mental and emotional lives. And it destroys the balance between men and women. And the same covetousness that is women trying to get into men's spaces, men getting into women's spaces, that covetousness of voting with their feet, of, well, where are the privileges? That covetousness follows. Wherever someone covets someone else's positions, you're ruining things. You're ruining things for the original population. You're ruining things for just everyone in general because you're degrading the relationships that are possible. And we are seeing the result of it. So that is the crux of the matter, is that it's covetousness, and the results of it are that it's worse for everybody. It degrades the relationship that can be put together to have a better symbiosis of energy, time, effort, appreciation, and love, because it goes both ways. Men want to be appreciated for all the hard work that they do, and there's all sorts of different ways they can be appreciated. And same thing with women. Women want to be appreciated. They want to be loved. And so they can be loved and appreciated for all the different things that they do. They don't have to be the same. And in fact, having them be different, because biologically and mentally and emotionally they are, and it can be seen. And these choices that they make of themselves also show that. And each person's very unique and different. And that's all great. But trying to sit there and leverage and force and demean and any which way, whether it was earlier the men just trashing Eve, or if it was the other way, that women now are just trashing men, it never ends up good. Sorry, that's my big rant. Love you lots. We'll see you, Pa.